It was a beautiful and sunny day in Greenfield, a small town where everybody seemed to know one another. The streets were peaceful, the air fresh, and the sounds of birds singing filled the quiet neighborhoods. Jenny, a young woman in her mid-20s, was feeling excited as she prepared to send a special birthday gift to her best friend Emma. The two had known each other since childhood, but now they lived far apart. Emma had moved to Chicago for work a few years ago, and Jenny stayed in Greenfield, where life was quieter and simpler. Jenny finished her breakfast, looked out the window, and smiled. The day seemed perfect. On the kitchen table sat a small but neatly wrapped package, a gift for Emma. It was a thoughtful present. Inside the box was a book Emma had been wanting to read, along with some gourmet chocolates from Jenny's favorite local shop. Jenny knew Emma had been talking about this book for months, but with her busy work schedule, she never got around to buying it. Jenny thought this would be the perfect way to show Emma that even though they were miles apart, they were still connected. Jenny double-checked the address she had written on the package. She wanted to make sure that everything was correct. Emma's apartment in Chicago wasn't easy to find, and Jenny didn't want the gift to get lost. She read the address aloud to herself just to be safe. Emma Dawson, 432, North Lakeside Avenue, Apartment 16B, Chicago, Illinois, 60614. Satisfied that the address was right, she tucked a small birthday card into the box and sealed it up once more. Jenny glanced at the clock. It was still early, just before 9 a.m., and the post office wouldn't be busy yet. Perfect, she thought to herself. She grabbed her purse, put on her light jacket, and gently lifted the package. The post office wasn't far, just a short walk from her house, and the weather was too nice to drive. She decided to enjoy the fresh air and walk. The walk to the post office. As Jenny stepped outside, she felt the warmth of the sun on her face. Spring had arrived in Greenfield, and the town was coming alive after the long winter. Trees were blossoming with pink and white flowers, and tulips were blooming in many of her neighbors' gardens. The scent of fresh flowers filled the air, mixing with the occasional whiff of freshly baked bread from the bakery down the street. Jenny loved this time of year. It felt like everything was waking up, full of energy and promise. As she walked, Jenny passed familiar places in town. She smiled as she saw Mrs. Henderson in her garden, tending to her roses. Mrs. Henderson was one of Jenny's neighbors and had lived in Greenfield her whole life. Jenny waved and called out, "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson." "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Henderson replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Off to the post office today?" "Yes, I'm sending a birthday gift to Emma," Jenny said as she continued walking. "Oh, that's lovely. I'm sure she'll be thrilled. Say hello to her from me." Mrs. Henderson waved before returning to her flowers. Jenny walked further down the street and past the small park where she and Emma used to spend so much time together as kids. They would sit on the swings, talk for hours, and dream about the future. Now, Emma was living in a big city, working a demanding job, while Jenny had stayed behind, enjoying the slower pace of life in Greenfield. Sometimes, Jenny wondered what it would be like to live in a big city, with all the excitement and opportunities. But other times, like today, she was content with the peace and quiet of her hometown. Arriving at the post office, after walking for about 15 minutes, Jenny finally reached the Greenfield post office. It was an old brick building that had stood in the same spot for as long as Jenny could remember. The large, bold letters on the front of the building read United States Post Office, and the familiar red, white, and blue logo was displayed on the door. The post office in Greenfield was small, with only a few employees working there, but it was always a friendly place to visit. Jenny pushed open the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of paper and stamps filled the air. The post office was relatively quiet today, just as she had hoped. There were a few people in line, but not many. Jenny took her place at the back of the line and waited patiently, holding her package carefully in her hands. She could hear the quiet hum of the post office machinery in the background as packages were sorted and prepared for shipping. While she waited, Jenny looked around at the various items on display. There were rows of colorful envelopes, postcards from all over the world, and boxes of different sizes and shapes. Jenny had always enjoyed sending letters and postcards. There was something special about sending a physical letter, knowing that the person on the other end would be happy to receive it. She often sent postcards to Emma when she traveled, even if it was just a short trip to another town. Emma loved getting postcards in the mail, and she always saved them in a scrapbook. As Jenny looked at the people around her, she wondered what kind of packages they were sending. In front of her, there was an older man wearing a gray hat and glasses. He was holding a large envelope, flipping it over nervously in his hands. He looked like he was in a hurry, checking the time on his watch every few minutes. Jenny guessed he might be sending some important documents. Behind her, a young woman was holding a small box, much like Jenny's, and talking on the phone. It seemed like everyone had a story, and Jenny liked imagining what each person's day was like. A conversation at the counter. After a few minutes, Jenny reached the front of the line. She walked up to the counter where Susan, the post office clerk, was working. Susan had been working at the Greenfield post office for as long as Jenny could remember. She was a cheerful woman in her early 50s, with short brown hair and glasses that she always wore at the tip of her nose. "Good morning, Jenny." Susan greeted her with a warm smile. "What can I do for you today?" "Good morning, Susan," Jenny replied. "I'm sending a birthday gift to Emma in Chicago. I want to make sure it gets there on time." "Chicago, huh? Well, let's see what we can do." Susan took the package from Jenny and looked at the address. "Is this her new place? I remember you used to send things to her at a different address." "Yes," Jenny nodded. "She moved to a new apartment last year. It's closer to her job now." "That's great," Susan said as she began typing Emma's address into the computer. "So, do you want to send this by regular mail or express mail?" Jenny paused for a moment, thinking. She wanted the package to arrive before Emma's birthday, but she also didn't want to spend too much money. "What's the difference again?" Jenny asked, wanting to be sure. "Well," Susan explained, "regular mail will take about 5 to 7 days, depending on the weather and the route. Express mail, on the other hand, will get there in 2 or 3 days, but it costs a bit more. Regular mail is cheaper, but if you're in a hurry, express mail is the way to go." Jenny thought about it for a moment. Emma's birthday was only 3 days away, and Jenny didn't want to take any chances. She had been planning this gift for weeks, and it was important to her that Emma received it on time. "I'll go with express mail," Jenny decided. "I don't want to risk it being late." "Good choice," Susan said with a nod. She placed the package on the scale to weigh it. "It's about 2 pounds, so with express mail, that will be $18. Is that okay?" "That's fine," Jenny said as she reached into her purse to get her wallet. She handed Susan the money, feeling relieved that her package would arrive on time. A friendly chat. While Susan prepared the shipping label, Jenny and Susan continued to chat. It wasn't uncommon for people in Greenfield to take their time at the post office. There was never any rush, and everyone knew everyone else. "So, how's Emma doing in Chicago?" Susan asked as she printed the label and carefully placed it on the package. "She's doing well," Jenny replied. "She's really busy with work, but she loves the city. We don't get to see each other as much as we'd like, though." "That's always tough," Susan said sympathetically. "It's hard when friends move away, but it's nice that you're keeping in touch. A thoughtful gift like this will mean a lot to her." "Yeah, I hope so," Jenny said, smiling. "We talk on the phone every week, but it's not the same as being together. I wish I could be there for her birthday, But at least this way, I can still celebrate with her in some small way. I'm sure she'll appreciate it, Susan said kindly. She handed Jenny the receipt and a tracking number for the package. Here you go. You can check this number to see when it arrives. Thanks, Susan, Jenny said, tucking the receipt into her purse. I really appreciate your help. Anytime, Jenny. Have a great day. Susan waved as Jenny turned to leave, running into an old friend. As Jenny was about to walk out of the post office, she heard a voice behind her. Jenny, is that you? She turned around and saw a familiar face, Mike, a friend from high school. He was holding a large box and smiling as he walked over to her. Mike, I didn't expect to see you here, Jenny said, surprised but happy to run into an old friend. I'm in town visiting my parents for the weekend, Mike explained. I'm sending them a few things they left at my apartment last time they visited me in the city. That's nice of you, Jenny said. How's life in the big city? Still working at that tech company? Yeah, it's going well. Busy but good, Mike replied with a grin. How about you? Still here in Greenfield? Yep, still here, Jenny said, laughing. Life is slower here, but I like it. I'm working remotely now, so I get to enjoy the peace and quiet. That sounds nice, Mike said, looking thoughtful. Sometimes I miss the calm of this place. The city can be a little overwhelming. A day at the park. After finishing her errands at the post office and catching up with Mike, Jenny decided to take a detour on her way home. The park she passed earlier seemed like the perfect spot to enjoy the rest of the sunny afternoon. She often came to the park to relax and think, especially after running errands or when she had a bit of extra time on her hands. The park was small but beautiful, with large oak trees that provided shade on warm days like today. There were several wooden benches scattered around, some near a small pond in the center, where ducks and geese often gathered. A few people were walking along the paths, enjoying the fresh air just as she was. Jenny found an empty bench near the pond and sat down, placing her purse next to her. She watched the ducks swim lazily across the water, their small ripples creating a peaceful rhythm. She smiled as she thought about how Emma would probably love this park if she were here. In fact, many of their childhood memories involved days spent outside, enjoying nature and dreaming about their future. Jenny pulled out her phone and opened the photo album she shared with Emma. It was full of old pictures from their time together in Greenfield, from high school trips to simple afternoons spent at the park. She scrolled through the photos, feeling nostalgic for those times, but also grateful for their lasting friendship. After spending some time in the park, Jenny checked the time and realized she should head home. She stood up, taking one last look at the pond before making her way back through the quiet streets of Greenfield. Reflections at home. When Jenny arrived home, she felt satisfied with how her day had gone. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street below. She thought about how lucky she was to have such good friends, even if they didn't live nearby anymore. Sending Emma's package had reminded her that distance didn't have to weaken their bond. In fact, it made the moments they shared, whether through phone calls, video chats, or thoughtful gifts, even more meaningful. As Jenny sipped her tea, she smiled, imagining Emma's reaction when the package arrived. She knew her friend would love the gift and appreciate the effort Jenny had put into sending it on time. Vocabulary review. Package, a box or item that you send in the mail. Post office, a place where people send letters and packages. Express mail, fast delivery service for sending mail. Regular mail, standard, slower delivery service. Receipt, a piece of paper showing payment for a service or item.